All right, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us, in which part of the country here. So thank you everybody for taking the time out of your day to join our webinar here. We are having our webinar on how metering as a service can reduce risk and improve outcomes in advanced metering projects. So looking forward to getting into the conversation and discussion here. Before we get started though, just wanted to give a couple of tips to enhance your webinar experience. So if you can, we recommend closing all of your email, messaging apps, any other programs that are currently not in use. They do have a tendency to interfere with the reception of the webinar, can cause some buffering and poor sound quality issues. So if you could close those out, that would be preferred. And if you do need technical assistance, that can be found at the GoToWebinar technical support page at the link that's listed in your handouts and on the slide below. So if you do have any issues, feel free to go to that support link down at the bottom there. And then just a reminder that AWWA does not endorse or improve any of the products or services. Any mention of specific products or services in this webinar does not represent AWWA endorsement. So now that we've got that disclaimer out of the way here, just wanted to also let you know that we will leave time for question and answer towards the end of the presentation. But if you do have questions at any point during the webinar, please submit those questions through the chat function, and myself and the other presenters will be able to see those during the presentation. If it's something quick and easy, we'll be sure to just kind of mention it during the presentation, but we will leave time at the end for questions as well. And with that all out of the way, I think we can go ahead and get started. So again, thank you everybody for tuning into this webinar. My name is Jacob Jasperson. I am a senior advisor at Utility Metering Solutions, UMS. I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Joey Mitchell, who is the vice president at Utility Metering Solutions. And today we're going to be talking about how metering as a service can reduce risk and improve outcomes in advanced metering projects. So we're very excited about the topics and the agenda that we're going to hit on today during the presentation. We'll talk about a number of things, but we're going to work our way through kind of the evolution of advanced metering, or AMI, some of the complexities that are involved with that, talk a little bit about what metering as a service is, and then how you and other utilities can use metering as a service to eliminate risk and reduce complexity. I'm then going to throw it over to Joey, who's going to give us some real world examples on how this has been applied in real life situations with other utilities and municipalities. And then, like I said, we're going to wrap up with questions and answers for anybody that has any specific questions. So the first thing that we want to touch on is really just the complexity, the overall complexity of advanced metering and AMI. And I think it's important to start here because I've been in the industry for almost 15 years now at this point. And I have seen, even in just the short time period that I've been in the industry, I've seen rapid change in AMI products, AMI services, and how they're deployed. And so, I think that one of the things we want to start with, and again, this is just a high level review for most people, I think, in the audience here. But if we think about all of the different products and components that goes into an advanced metering program, and I'm giving myself a second here because it doesn't look like my slides are advancing. But if we think about all the different products that are involved, let me just get my slideshow going up here. There we go. I think we're good now. Hopefully everybody can see that. Apologies for the technical issues there, but if we think about all the different products that are involved in an advanced metering deployment, obviously everybody's familiar with the water metering products, the transmitters, the reading networks that go along with it, and then you've got other ancillary components, in the additional metering infrastructure like boxes, lids, different sensors like pressure, temperature, water quality sensors, the software component, customer alerts, a lot of different moving parts and pieces. And in most cases, all of those different products are not provided by the same vendor. In a lot of cases, they're not provided by the same vendor. If you take it one step further and you look at the different services that are required to deploy an advanced metering system, now you've got a lot of different parts and pieces that in almost all cases are not provided by one vendor. For most of these different products and services, there's going to be multiple vendors that you're going to be interfacing with. And I think that in a lot of cases, that's really the way that it's designed, right? You might not want to have all of your products or services provided by the same manufacturer or the same vendor. In most cases, most of the same manufacturers or vendors can't provide all of those different products and services. And so the challenge with advanced metering deployments is how do you coordinate all of those different components into one smooth, seamless advanced metering upgrade project. Part of the reason why these AMI systems tend to be so complex and so difficult to deploy is we're really talking about three different projects all wrapped up in one here. You've got an IT project, right? You've got a lot of different integrations and interfaces between software platforms. You've got a construction project where you're physically taking water meters, meter reading technology, lids, pits, boxes, and physically putting them into the ground. And then you've also got a business transformation project where you're taking a way that you used to do business with either mobile or manual read systems and completely changing it with all of the different data, all of the different alerts and alarms and exception conditions. All of that leads to a very complex deployment. The other thing that tends to happen with these advanced metering projects is they're very technical, right? There's a lot of technical expertise that's required. In some cases, some of that technical expertise might be, available within the city or the municipality. In other cases, it might not be. So you might have to go to external sources in order to get all the different technical components required to deploy it. And the third reason why these programs tend to be very complex is they're expensive, right? There is a lot of, either capital dollars or ongoing operational expense that's involved with getting these systems up and running. And so if you look at just kind of a graphical representation of what this looks like, again, you can see there's a lot of different, this is just an example that, we have used working with a client previously of all the different components that go into deploying an advanced metering system. And so there's a lot of complexity that goes along with it. And because of that complexity, there's a lot of procurement complexity, right? There's multiple different ways that you can procure all of these different products or services depending on the requirements of the utility. And so what we want to talk about here for the remainder of this presentation is kind of the evolution of how we as a utility industry have started to acquire and buy these different products and services, and how there might be some additional ways that we can utilize that can help reduce the complexity, reduce the different technical requirements that are required by the utility to deploy these. So let's just take a step back. Let's go back maybe 6, 7, 8 years previously and talk a little bit about software as a service. So I've been in the industry long enough to remember when software as a service was not the standard with which the utility industry acquired software, right? There was a point in time where a lot of utilities, if they were deploying an advanced metering project, would require that the software be hosted on-site or on-premise at the utility, right? You would have a server on-site, you would have a group of people that were managing that server, and probably about 7 or 8 years ago, the industry started to migrate away from that on-premise software model and migrate towards the software as a service model. And there were a number of reasons for that, but the main reason was the reduction of complexity for the utility itself to manage that software, and the ability for the vendors and the software manufacturers to be able to increase the development and the rollout of new software products and services to the utility. Fast forward a couple years after that, and now we get into this whole concept of network as a service, right? And again, prior to network as a service being introduced into the industry, the norm for most AMI deployments was to have a AMI network that was purchased, procured, monitored, managed, and deployed by the utility itself. So you would acquire the data collectors, reading network infrastructure, you would install it yourself, you would maintain it yourself. Any updates, upgrades, things like that would be the responsibility of the utility itself. What utilities started to realize was that this was not something that was maybe necessarily a core competency of theirs. And again, for the same reasons that the industry migrated away from on-premise software towards software as a service, they started to migrate towards this concept of network as a service, where the vendor or the manufacturer would not only deploy the network infrastructure, but also maintain it throughout the life of the AMI project. And again, this reduced the complexity of the deployment for utilities and municipalities and allowed them to not have to worry about deploying or maintaining these network infrastructures. Well, when we talk about metering as a service, really we're just kind of taking that next logical step from the transition of software as a service to network as a service, and now to metering as a service. And so we're going to get into a little bit more detail on what's all included in that metering as a service option. But again, the primary driver in a lot of these instances and a lot of these transitions to the as a service model is not necessarily a cost reduction. It's reducing the risk and the technical requirements for the utility to deploy these types of technologies. And so when we talk about metering as a service, what do we really mean? What exactly is metering as a service? Well, put very simply, metering as a service is a complete, comprehensive advanced metering upgrade program that is delivered as a service, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about what that all means, but if you go back to slides 4 and 5, when we say comprehensive, what do we mean by comprehensive? In slides 4 and 5, we talked about all of the different hardware and services components that go into doing an advanced metering program. That's what we mean by comprehensive. All of those products and services are required for an AMI deployment to be successful. And so in order to be a comprehensive advanced metering upgrade program, all of that needs to be included in the as a service model. So we're talking about all the metering equipment, we're talking about all the services required to install that equipment, we're talking about all of the ancillary components like the lids, the boxes, any updates to, curb stops, check valves, all of those different things that go into making a metering program successful. And then when we say delivered as a service, what that means is just like you would expect in a software as a service or in a network as a service deployment, that as a service model is always up to date, always monitored, always performing to service level agreements. And so how does the as a service model work? Well, really, when you think about these types of as a service deployments, a lot of utilities already have something similar to this that is deployed within their city or their municipality, right? So we talked about software as a service. In many cases, there might be water tank maintenance contracts that are in place where the utility is no longer doing the day-to-day maintenance on those water tanks. Same things with managed water treatment facilities. And really, the key is that the main focus with the as a service model is reducing or eliminating risk for all of these large capital deployments. And so when we talk about risk, there's a couple of different buckets that risk could fall into. Technology risk, implementation risk, capital risk, performance risk. We'll hit on all of those in a little bit, but really the idea is you want to have a model in place that reduces the risk to the utility. And part of that is the ability to be able to exit that contract if it's not working, right? So being able to cancel that contract and move to a different contract that meets the needs of the utility, that's really the core of an as a service, right? Because when you think about something like software as a service, for example, if you're not getting the benefit from your software as a service platform or the data that's coming in from your software as a service platform, then you would simply move to a different platform that did provide you that. So those are kind of the key components when we talk about the as a service model. The other thing that I think is critical and is very often overlooked when we talk about these as a service models or really these advanced metering deployments is what happens after the product gets installed, right? And so, you know, when we typically think about an advanced metering project, a lot of time and thought and money goes into identifying the product component. You know, a lot of time goes into identifying the services piece. How are we going to actually get it all deployed? But really, in our view, if you are going to do an AMI deployment, it has to address the ongoing support and the maintenance piece of it, or it's not a comprehensive metering program. And so that would include things like regular reporting and monitoring of exception conditions, or, you know, regular meter testing, regular business process review, right? Making sure that the way that you have the system deployed today is the optimal way to be able to utilize it to take advantage of all of the different components that go into an advanced metering program. So let's talk a little bit about complexity, because I think that this is an important component. We've hit on it a couple of different times, but again, we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, advanced metering deployments are very complex. And so really one of the primary benefits in utilizing as a service model is how do we eliminate and reduce that complexity. And so I'm going to use an example, an analogy here, and anybody that knows me that's on this webinar is going to understand immediately why I chose this analogy. So I'm a big fan of wine, right? I do enjoy the occasional glass of wine from time to time. And so I'm going to use an analogy with wine. So if you're a wine drinker, or really any beverage drinker, right? Soda, water, beer, whatever. There's a couple of different ways that you can consume that beverage. So the first and most obvious way that you can consume that beverage is I can go to a restaurant or a bar and I can order a glass of wine. And somebody is going to open the bottle for me. They're going to pour me a glass. They're going to hand me the glass. And all I have to do is drink that glass, and that's it. That's the extent of my involvement in the transaction. And I have to obviously pay for it. The second way that I could enjoy that beverage is I could go to a liquor store, or I could go to a grocery store, and I could buy a bottle of wine, right? I could buy the entire bottle, and then I could drink, you know, 1 glass, 2 glasses, 3 glasses, whatever I wanted out of that bottle. The third way that I could enjoy a glass of wine is I could make the wine myself, right? I could go to a hobby store, I could buy a make your own wine kit, I could buy the grapes or the different prepackaged components that are involved in making that wine, and I could make the wine myself and make 1 bottle, 2 bottles, 3 bottles, however many I wanted. So that's the other way that I could do it. The fourth way that I could do it, if I really wanted to be industrious, is I could grow my own grapes. I could have, you know, 1 vine of grapes. I could have 2 vines of grapes. I could get an entire vineyard of grapes, grow my own grapes, and produce the wine that way. So if you think about at each of those different inflection points, right, whether it's buying a glass of wine or buying a vineyard and growing my own wine, think about the risk that is involved as I move further along that line, right? So what's the risk that I go to a restaurant and I order a glass of wine and the glass of wine is bad? The risk is probably pretty low, because in most cases, if you're going to a decent restaurant, they're buying a lot of bottles of wine. They're, you know, tasting them and serving them on a regular basis. So the risk that I'm going to get a bad glass of wine is pretty low. Conversely, if I go to the complete opposite end of that spectrum and I buy a vineyard and I grow my own grapes and make my own wine, what's the risk that 1 glass of wine that I'm going to get out of that could be bad? The risk is probably substantially higher, right? Because there's a lot of different conditions and factors that go into what makes a good glass of wine. So I could have weather-related issues. It could be a bad harvest. I could not produce the wine properly. There's a lot of different steps along the way that would introduce additional risk into the equation of growing my own grapes and making my own wine versus going to the restaurant and buying a glass of wine. And it's not a perfect analogy, but in a lot of ways, it's very similar to AMI, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can procure AMI, and each step has its different pros and cons, and there's different risks associated with how you would procure an AMI system at each step of the way. And I think we should stop here and just make the point that, we believe that every utility needs to deploy AMI. And I think we're at a point in the industry that it's not simply a matter of if utilities are going to deploy AMI, it's a matter of when utilities are going to deploy AMI. And there's a lot of benefits to deploying these advanced metering systems. When we think about these projects, there's really 5 main buckets that the benefits would fall into, right? Reliable and accurate meter readings, visibility into your distribution system health, visibility into customer usage trends, enhanced customer communication or satisfaction, and then resource allocation efficiency. We'll touch on each one of those in a little bit. But if we accept the assumption that everybody needs to move to AMI at some point, well, then the next logical question becomes, how do I deploy those systems? And again, there's a number of different ways that you can do it, each one being, having slight differences and different pros and cons depending on how you want to deploy it. But when we talk about the as a service model, the metering as a service model, we're really talking about utilizing that as a service model to help offset some of the risk that's involved with deploying an advanced metering system. So again, we talked about the 4 different buckets of risk earlier in the presentation, but if you just think about an advanced metering deployment, really all of the risk falls into one of 4 buckets, right? First one being capital risk. Obviously, it's a lot of upfront capital dollars that are being utilized for this type of a project. There's a performance risk, right? Where maybe the products or the services that you acquire don't work in the way that they're promised. You could have a design risk, right? Maybe you thought that you needed a particular design of advanced metering program and it doesn't quite meet your business needs or your requirement. And then the last one is kind of the construction risk, right? So you pay somebody to do the installation or the deployment or the implementation, and those products don't operate. And so when we talk about the as a service model, really it's helping to reduce or eliminate all 4 of those different risks, right? So on the design risk, you're offloading the design to a third-party service provider that's going to help you design something that meets your specific business needs. On the capital risk, when you utilize the as a service model, you're really reducing or eliminating the upfront capital costs that you have associated with these types of deployments, and so on and so forth. So I think the other thing to mention here is when we talk about using a metering as a service model versus some of the other ways of procuring these advanced metering programs, what we're really talking about is augmenting your existing staff to utilize the system to maximum efficiency, right? We're not necessarily talking about completely replacing everybody on your staff, right? Because that just wouldn't be feasible or practical. But really utilizing the as a service model helps you to augment your staff and allows you to take advantage of the benefits of advanced metering much more quickly. So how does it do that? Well, again, we talked about the 4 different areas, but in a lot of cases, it revolves around capital costs, right? So eliminating any sort of negative impact to bond or credit rating because you're utilizing the ongoing operational cost rather than the upfront capital cost. We talked a little bit already about being able to exit a contract, right? But that's really a hallmark of a metering as a service deployment, is being able to exit that contract, that as a services contract, if it's not providing you with the value or the benefit that you would want out of it. So with any metering as a service contract, being able to cancel that or exit it is really key. And so when we talk, we're going to talk a little bit about the financial component of it, because I think it's an important one. But when we talk about ROI, a lot of people like to talk about ROI for these advanced metering projects. And what do we really mean when we say ROI? So everybody knows the standard equation for ROI, net profit over net cost, right? So if I'm using an example, let's say I bought a stock for $10 a share, I bought 1,000 shares, and then I sold that stock again at $12.50 per share at 1,000 shares, right? Everybody can do that calculation pretty quickly and realize that I've got a 25% ROI. Well, when we talk about advanced metering projects, what are we categorizing as profit on AMI, right? In most cases, when we're deploying an advanced metering project, we're talking about government municipalities or cities, and in a lot of cases, these are nonprofit organizations, right? So how do you calculate this idea of profit in a nonprofit organization? But I think the real key is maximizing profit or return our primary goal when we're deploying advanced metering projects. And so, I think a better way to think about these types of projects is, rather than thinking about it strictly from a cost benefit or ROI perspective, we want to start thinking about what does it give me in terms of a return on my technology, right? And so the way that we want to think about this instead of ROI is something that we call return on advanced metering, right? So what is return on advanced metering? Well, if I think about the 5 buckets that we talked about earlier, the 5 benefits of advanced metering, in almost all of the cases, we're talking about increasing capabilities within the utility or increasing efficiencies within how we provide the services to our end customers. So again, using a similar equation, and just to be clear, I want to say I'm not advocating that utilities go out and actually calculate what this return on advanced metering is, right? Because there's no benchmark. Nobody would really know what a good return on advanced metering number is. But just as a conceptual way to kind of think about how we want to gauge the success of these different projects, thinking about it from the standpoint of, what am I gaining from an efficiency standpoint or capability standpoint? And then what is that costing me, either in upfront deployment costs or ongoing annual fees? And so if we think about some of the efficiencies that we can gain within an advanced metering system, you've got things like time savings, you've got cost savings, you've got the increased output per unit of time. When we look at different capabilities, increasing our customer satisfaction or trust within the utility, that's a big one. That's a big reason that a lot of utilities are deploying an AMI system. Being able to see increased utilization gains, right? So being able to do more with less with that advanced metering system. Regulatory compliance is another big reason why a lot of utilities look at deploying these advanced metering projects. And then if we look at the deployment costs, right, there's very real costs to deploying these types of technologies. And I think it's important that we factor that into the equation, right? So those, direct costs, indirect costs. So indirect costs would be things like, staff hours that are involved in putting together all of the different documents and all of the different procurement options for deploying these type of advanced metering systems. So think of the return on advanced metering as kind of a framework to think through how you want to judge the success or failure of an advanced metering deployment project. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Joey Mitchell, who's going to give us some real world examples on how this has worked or how this can work in actual practical applications. So Joey, I'm going to throw it over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Jacob. I appreciate that. So today I'm going to talk briefly about the jambalaya capital of the world. That's the city of Gonzales, Louisiana. If you did not know that, they first started their jambalaya festival in 1968. So this is and that's what they're known for. So we'll talk a little bit about their project. I wanted to talk about that because it's been we've had that one up and running for almost 5 years now. So if you go on to the next slide, just kind of want to talk about where they were in 2018. In a situation where they had outsourced meter reading, so the city was paying a separate contractor to read the meters, which often led to inaccurate reads. Also, there was a lot of problems keeping the same people on staff to be able to read those meters. And obviously, whenever you have inaccurate meters or meter reading, a lot of the caused an inflow of calls to customer service. And the city was really in a situation where they didn't have a ton of money for metering upgrades. A lot of their meters were 20 plus years old. And over the last, 3 to 4, 5 years prior to 2018, they were in a situation where, the water and sewer revenue was steadily declining because of those the aging meters. And when they were really looking at how to, fix their problem, obviously money played a significant role in their, inability to solve it. So the way they were solving it was really to upgrade, a couple hundred, 400 or 500 meters at a time that they could. So if you go on to the next slide, when they looked at metering as a service, it was really an opportunity where they did not have to, extend their capital budget. And in fact, it allowed the city to, go to a subscription model and then time the first payment to where their budget was aligned. So if you look at their project, they started it in the very end of 2018, actually didn't make their first payment until their budget cycle started in 2019, which really helped them get their budget passed, get the service set up. And the capital budget that they did have for some of their meter replacements was able to be utilized to fix some other things in their distribution system. So in this case, they wanted, there were some boxes and some lids and some other things, backflow prevention devices that they were able to readdress the metering budget to fix those things. And if you look at in the last 5 years, some of the things that have improved for the city, their meter reading time is really nothing compared to what it used to be. They're able to, reads are coming in every 15 minutes. The accuracy of those reads are, accurate. They're not estimated. And it's really reduced the manual readings that the contractor and or the city would have to go and double check. It's allowed their citizens, to really also be able to pick their billing cycle. So if there was times of the month that some customers were wanted to receive a bill, they could, and then it's minimized some costs, obviously with some labor and some gas and some vehicle maintenance that they had with their manual meter reading. Also given the city the ability to proactively find leaks before the billing, the billing read happens. So because all data is coming in, 15-minute or hourly intervals, they're able to find issues with customers' meters before the read and mid-cycle. The reduction of water loss has really been big, and one of the things when it comes to money, if you will, or the amount of revenue being collected for providing water, if in 2017 the city was collecting roughly $2.3 million in water and sewer revenue, and last year that was close to 3.3. And then the way they did that was about $350,000. It was tied to a fee, an AMI fee that's ultimately been passed on to their clients. But the other 30% increase is really tied to the recovery of lost water and identifying theft and identifying leaks proactively. And if you go on to the next slide, Jacob, some of the way that this worked for the city is they've upgraded. And when the program started at 5,000 endpoints, it's all been moved to a monthly subscription. They've grown tremendously. They're kind of in a growth area. So in the last 5 years, they've added, close to 800, a little over 800 devices to their subscription. And one of the uniquer things, like I mentioned before, is they took a monthly subscription price and they adopted $525, and they passed that on as a fee to their clients. That fee, it was really the only form of if some folks might look at it as a rate increase, that was really the only form of a rate increase passed along. So that's why those numbers that I provided were really kind of the vast majority of it, 30%, 10% tied to that fee, but 30% tied to the recovery of lost water. Some of the lessons that they learned is that having a good, knowledgeable field staff to work with theirs during the upgrade process. There's a lot of in this case, customers that hadn't had their meter touched in 20 years, if you will. So being able to provide that smooth interaction with their customers. And it's really important in these projects. I think a lot of people who've been through it, they understand that this is really a data project along with a physical upgrade project. So being able to get the seamless transfer of new meter information into the billing system is crucial for this type of project success. And then, just overall good project communication, making sure that you select the right team, having the right deployment plans, processes in place, and really having a program where there's governance that allows everybody to understand how the project is going to be governed. And in this case, the service provider provided all the metering equipment and software and all the things that Jacob talked about. And where in the city, on some of the other upgrades that they wanted, they provided those things. So being able to manage and make sure that both of those elements of the project are reported on is very important. And then just what do you do in unforeseen situations and challenges? So how are those addressed, and making sure that you not only have the plan, but you have the budget to be able to address that. It was pretty easy for the city of Gonzales because they had subscribed to other sort of programs similar to a metering as a service program with other parts of their operations. So it was really a little bit easier to kind of chew on that concept. But if you go to the next slide, some of the things that they've thought about while making decisions on, do you build or do you subscribe to a service. And if you look at this slide, what they're, one of the key decisions that led the city to go this route was the time. So they were really under a time crunch to be able to upgrade their meters. They had issues with the contractor. So being able to get the project done in this case, 7 months time, spend $0 in capital to get it set up, and then have your first monthly payment happen, 8 to 10 months after the project was set up, really enabled them to get everything, up, operational, recovering lost revenue, and then, automating their processes and really only paying a fraction of the cost at that time. So they were able to really start to see, the benefits of deploying advanced metering in a fraction of the time, and then recover that revenue in a fraction of the time, that really outperformed, the way they were doing business before.
Hey Joey,
with
Joey,
that,
sorry to interrupt. I'm curious now, since we're on the topic of Gonzales. So one of the questions that we had come in was asking about radiation or RF waves from AMI and customers, having worries or complaints about that. Do you know, did Gonzales, deal with that complaint? And if they did, do you know how they kind of addressed it in some of their proactive communication with their customers?
Yeah, so in Gonzales, that question did come up, or will this system harm, their residents? In Gonzales, we used a cellular transmission device that transmitted, 6 times a day. So, we had a public outreach campaign that explained the technology that we were using, and most folks are very familiar with the cellular technology, and the fact that these devices are sitting in their front yard, not next to their ear, and transmitting and receiving data for milliseconds, not minutes, was part of the messaging that was put out. Thank you, Jacob.
Perfect. And I think we can probably just transition into the Q&A here. So we've got a couple of good questions. So we talked a little bit about the radiation from AMI. The other question that came up is, once AMI is deployed, it's the question of kind of calibration. So how often do these meters need to be calibrated, and who performs the calibration? So Joey, I'm curious your thoughts on that, but I'll say, to kind of set the stage, we are starting to see a little bit of a transition in the industry towards solid state or electronic meters. And so, I think that kind of shifts the idea of calibration or ongoing meter testing a little bit, because now you've got a situation where, in theory, the meter should perform accurately for the entire life. But it is an interesting topic because, you've got a situation where you've got an electronic or a static style meter that, really should be on a regular basis still, confirming that it's accurate and operating correctly. So, how do you kind of think about that, Joey, or maybe how did Gonzales think about the ongoing support and maintenance of that?
So the way they thought about it was they really just wanted to validate that the meter was still operating within its warranty thresholds. So there is some validation that occurs every couple years. They were every 2 years on the smaller residential meters, like the question was asking. I think the most important thing in Gonzales is that they did have some industrial customers, and I believe there were 50 of them or so that kind of contributed to about 50% of the overall revenue. So they really wanted a testing plan in place to ensure that those high usage meters were still accurate. So that is being monitored as well. And then there was another question in there that the total number of meters today is 5,800. When the project started, it was 5,000 meters.
Yeah, the other question, Joey, that I think is maybe a good one to kind of spend some time on. We talked a little bit in that section of return on advanced metering, the idea of being able to increase regulatory compliance as a concept to think about when you're looking at the overall return on advanced metering. Did Gonzales kind of think about any of those regulatory issues, or I guess what are some of the regulations that you see as we're deploying these systems that advanced metering and AMI can kind of help utilities stay in compliance with?
I think, you know, a couple of things is understanding water loss is kind of a first and foremost component that nearly every utility in the United States needs to report on. So and if you look at just technology in general, having an automated system that will take readings of your system in a specific time of day and being able to cross-reference that that data is key to being able to stay in compliance accurately, to be able to report on that accurately. I think some of the things that are being added today are water quality. I think that's still very much a manual process for the vast majority of water utilities out there, and I think AMI offers some good opportunities and hope to be able to take water quality data, take water data from various points within the distribution system to be able to report on that in a more automated way. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, no, I think it does actually feed nicely into an earlier question that we got that is talking a little bit about total cost of ownership, reduction in overall costs, and so I think that this concept of including a number of, we'll say, non-tangible cost reductions in the calculation when you look at the benefit of advanced metering. I think that regulatory compliance is probably one of them, but so the question that Scott had asked is, while the intent with AMI is to assist operators in integrating and managing the software overheads, how does that translate to actual total cost of ownership? And isn't there supposed to be a reduction in overall costs? And I think, Joey, I'm curious to hear your perspective on it, but Scott, one of the things that I would say is, I think, yes, first and foremost, there should be a reduction in overall costs. I think the challenge that we've had as an industry, and I think I'll just bucket everybody in the industry into this bucket, right? But the challenge that we've had is it's difficult sometimes to get and put hard and fast numbers on what those overall cost reductions look like, right? And in a lot of cases, they're intangible, or maybe it's a cost reduction that's going to take place 5, 7, 10 years down the road, right? And so, I think that the intent with moving to any sort of advanced metering technology or platform is to reduce the overall costs. From my perspective, I think that the better way to address the immediate return for these projects is to look at some of those key specific performance indicators or benefits to things like customer service, or being able to operate more efficiently, or being able to do more things within the platform. So Joey, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on that.
I think my answer, Jacob, is maybe a little bit more. I think if we go to what the purpose of a meter is, like if we just start there, the purpose of putting a meter in a distribution system was to charge customers fairly and accurately. So you wanted to charge me if I had a big home and Jacob had a little home, he shouldn't have to pay the same amount as me. And I think living in a system where you are able to tap in and water is being able to pump to your home, you should be able to, the intent of metering in general was that. I think what happens is that sometimes we put those programs in place. So we put a meter there. Obviously, then it all kinds of costs happen from there. I have to read it, I have to bill it, I have to send those bills, I have to collect. And so I get all these costs that are associated with just trying to bill somebody fairly. So then over time, I think once all those things are in place, sometimes it's forgotten that if you leave a meter there, especially the old technology, and it's been there for 20, 30, 40 years, you've lost the whole purpose, right? Which was to bill people fairly. because you're no longer doing that because that device is inaccurate. So then if you maintain your system, now the question says, well, with new technology out there, what if I just go with an old meter or I do a new style meter? Well, if you just look at the cost for cost, I mean, cost wise, I think the technology in a meter has gone up, and the cost overall from what it was before to now is relatively the same. So whether you use, you want to drive-by or AMI technology, I kind of tell people all the time, like those two technology points, I mean, there's really not a cost difference. It's really all the other added benefits. So I think, yes, we want to reduce costs, but sometimes I see potential clients, we're in this situation where we don't do something because we don't have the money to do it, or we didn't properly prepare for these type of projects, years ago, or fund a fund to take care of it. So we're in this constant maintenance cycle. So one of the things I think an as a service model does is it gets you out of the constant maintenance cycle, which inherently will reduce your costs.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. And I think as part of that, so just kind of circling back to the whole idea of, what does an as a service model look like and what's all included in that? And what do we mean by, comprehensive advanced metering programs? One of the questions that Joseph asked was, are you guys assisting utilities on the EPA regulation for identifying and replacing lead fixtures in the distribution system? And so the short answer, Joseph, is yes. Any comprehensive, advanced metering changeout program would also include all of the different components involved with making sure that you as a utility are up to date on some of those, again, regulatory requirements. So Joey, just a couple of quick questions, because I know we've got about 8 minutes left here. So we're just going to do a couple of quick questions on metering as a service as a concept in general, because we've got a few questions there on that. So one of the questions was, what is the ideal number of services for metering as a service? And then is there an estimated time frame for planning, integration, deployment, things like that?
So I think ideal service connections, I think really it could work for any size utility. You start to see a plateau in terms of price once you get to about 2,000 meters and beyond. So you don't see a really big jump. And then the second part of that question, Jacob, was?
The second part of that question was, what is the estimated time frame to do the complete end-to-end planning, integration, deployment, et cetera?
I think average, I always would like to say it's like 4 to 6 months to do that. I think if you're a larger, if you have, many more service connections, I think it takes a little bit longer. But in general, that 4 to 6 months is the right time frame. The other thing, I just follow up on the water quality component that I had mentioned before. I think what you're seeing right now, this is for metering only. I think AMI has evolved where in the beginning, all you were getting in terms of data was interval read data. So you can do a lot of things with interval read data. But now you're seeing a lot of different alarm data. You're getting temperature data, leak alarms, and then you're starting to see devices that have like other sensors that are integrated into it, pressure monitoring, water quality, things of that nature, that can then that data be transmitted back through the network, and then you can start to do things with that data. So I think you're seeing the evolution of an advanced metering network be able to do other things than maybe what you could do 10 years ago.
Yeah, definitely. And then one question from Sarah: with metering as a service, does the provider of the service or the utility own the meters and the endpoints?
So the short answer is yes. The service provider would typically retain ownership on the devices that are put in. And then, as to Jacob's point, if there was a termination in the contract, then those devices would be, provided back to the service provider.
Yeah, and then another question here: any fees for the meters? So I'm assuming that question is are there any ongoing fees with the metering as a service? But if we're misunderstanding that question, please let us know or clarify in the question. But any fees for the meter?
I'm not. I think there's just I think what ultimately happens in the way these are deployed is that you get a per meter per month or a per meter per year fee. So it does boil down to a per meter fee. And then and so that's the way it's typically provided to the client.
Yeah. And then Stan had asked, is this a good economic fit for a small system of 230 connections? And so Joey, I'll be curious to hear your thoughts. But Stan, I would just mention that, again, as we kind of talk about the differences between metering as a service with some of the other procurement methods that are out there, it's not necessarily something that is either a good fit for a small system or a large system. It really kind of boils down to what it is you're trying to accomplish with your advanced metering program and your advanced metering deployment, and whether you want to, have it kind of be this holistic, comprehensive deployment. Those types of advanced metering rollouts do fit very well with the metering as a service model. But again, all the different models of procurement are certainly valid and acceptable, whether it's a low bid or an RFP or a design build or a performance contract or a metering as a service model. They're all different. They're all very acceptable models of procurement, and they all have their pros and cons. So it really kind of boils down to, what it is that you're looking to get out of that advanced metering deployment. Joey, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
I would say, if I was the owner of a small system, 230 meters, I would have technology on it to be able to read and monitor it. So I think, yes, I do think there's just, Jacob made a comment before. I think we're in a day and age where, not to date myself, but, there used to be a day where, it was, should everybody have a computer or should everybody have a smartphone? And some of those questions and answers were debated for months or years in some cases. So I think we're at the point with AMI where I'm not sure it's a debate anymore. I think having technology on it. So yes, I do think it's a good economic fit.
Yeah, and I think kind of to close, because I know we've only got a couple of minutes here, but Elaine had asked a couple of questions or made a couple of comments about her system and asking for cities like, she's in St. Louis, she's got about 90,000 flat rate customers. They haven't really embraced technology. Joey, what would your advice be for, maybe some people in the water industry that, like Elaine, would like to take advantage of some of this advanced technology or some of the benefits of advanced metering, but maybe hasn't gotten the support internally or externally from some of their stakeholders?
So I don't know all the specifics on that particular, obviously utility, Elaine, but what I would say is that sometimes when you have so many service connections, and 90,000 isn't a small number, and you're on flat rate, the challenge is probably, or could be the fact that there really is no meter setting right now. And so when we're talking about meter replacement, it's not as expensive as like having to cut in a new meter, create a setting, whether that's in somebody's home or in their front yard in a box, and then putting all of the necessary items in that setting to be able to read and monitor that customer. So I think it's you know, if that's the case, I think probably the drawback has been money. And I do think putting that into a metering as a service option or plan could be a good way, um, a good way to solve that problem.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, I apologize. I know there's a couple of questions here that we didn't get a chance to answer, but all of the questions have been recorded. So we will definitely reach out to those questions that we didn't get to with some additional information. So just in closing, again, thank you everybody for your time. When we end the webinar, there will be a window that pops up with a brief survey. So if you could just take a minute to complete that questionnaire. Your feedback is very important to us, and it helps AWWA improve their programming. So with that, we hope that you all enjoyed the webinar, and on behalf of AWWA and UMS, I want to thank you guys for joining, and until next time, thank you for keeping the water safe and secure.